The combination of data and customer experience has become essential. And so today on CXOTalk, we're speaking with two profound experts. Danielle Crop, the Chief Data Officer of Albertsons, together with Bruno Aziza, who is the Head of Data and Analytics for Google Cloud.
My role and responsibility as Chief Data Officer at Albertsons is data science, data platforms, so data management and data governance, as well as data products. So all of those wonderful things that enable the enterprise to deliver on customer experience with data.
Bruno, tell us about Google Cloud and tell us about your role.
I run outbound product management for Google Cloud data analytics portfolio. That's products you might have heard like BigQuery and DataProc and Dataflow. We have lots of news, lots of new customers we can talk about today as it relates to the customer experience challenges and opportunities.
Danielle, maybe you can start us off by giving us some insight into this relationship between data and customer experience.
Today, it's essential, right? Customers expect that you're going to know, things about them that they would have, 30, 40 years ago would have never expected that you would know about them, right? They expect you to have an understanding of who they are, what relationship they have with you as a company, and what, purchases they've made in the past. This is an expectation that they have. And that you're going to customize your experience with them based on the information that you know about them. And so that's a fundamental difference. And so data and CX are inextricably entwined at this moment in time. And I consider that it's probably going to get even more entwined in the future.
When we talk about customer experience, what kinds of data do you think about gathering? Danielle at Albertsons and then Google, you're talking across a range of different organizations. What are the kind of patterns of data collection that you see?
Adds to what Danielle said is this notion of real time, which is becoming really important for, I think, organizations, but also customers who are going through their shopping experience. And just like Danielle said, they expect that not only you're going to understand them, but you're also going to understand cohort analysis, understand people just like them, so you can create really compelling experiences, help them find products that they need faster, and maybe consider products they didn't think about before. I think if you break down the types of data, there's at least 3 or 4 data types you have to be able to collect and transform and augment around the experience. The first one is, of course, the data about your particular customers and visitors and understanding who they are as individuals, but who they are as maybe groups of individuals, and understanding what's going to augment, if you will, their experience. The second type of data is everything around engagement. When you have a multi-channel experience online and a retail store and maybe through partner stores, you need to understand, okay, what are they, the click-through rates? What are some of the conversions that you're experiencing, because that's a sign, if you will, that you're presenting your customers with the right information. The other aspect is everything around behavior, right? So implicit behavior around purchase history, just like Danielle was saying, or abandonment of shopping carts. Why are people abandoning their cart? What does that tell us about the experience? Is it about the products not being available? Is it about something wrong about the site, or maybe they're dropping subscriptions that you were hoping they would keep? And then finally, is everything that's explicit. If you run surveys or if you ask them, hey, how was the experience in the store? How's the experience here? You can get a sense of how well did you deliver on this promise of having a customer experience. One last comment on real time is, if you think about non-retailers like an Uber or any of these organizations that are in the business of informing people of where are my goods, and there are real-time platforms, I think retailers also need to be able to provide this type of capability. And we certainly see companies like Albertsons, leading the way here, because they're able to not only optimize their inventory, they're able to optimize the experience while shopping, but also optimize the experience while delivering the goods if they are being shipped to the customer.
And Danielle, I see you nodding furiously as Bruno is talking.
The real-time aspect and the way that the cloud and, just the more modern infrastructure allows us to gather signals from our customers in real time and then make decisions in real time about what their needs are, is really unprecedented in human history. And it's, an exciting place for somebody in data like myself to be, right? Is how do we take all of this infrastructure and this amazing amount of data that we have and enable incredible experiences for our customers. One of the ones that I like that appeals to me the most, which we're still working on, is if you're shopping in the store, you're in the store holding onto your phone, right? If you're like me, you do that. I do that every time I'm in the store, right? I've got my list in front of me. I've got my app in front of me. What if we could push to people what they bought the last time they were in the produce aisle, right? Wouldn't that, while they're standing in the produce aisle, wouldn't that be super helpful to our customers? And while that takes a lot of infrastructure and capability that we don't necessarily have at this moment in time, it will be here soon. And I'm excited about those types of use cases.
We used to think about there's an online shopping experience and there's a in-person shopping experience, but increasingly, it's a hybrid shopping experience. So you had this multi-channel experience before, but what if you could bring them together? Even beyond the experience inside the store, we have retailers that we work with who are able to provide real-time inventory information with a specific aisle where you would find the what you're looking for while the person is traveling to the store, to really make it efficient for them to not have to waste a bunch of time to find what they're looking for. And so what Danielle is describing here, I really do think is the future of retail, is understanding this multi-channel, multi-format relationship and bringing it together to the service of excellent, customer experience. In the end, they're going to buy from you because you have created an environment, that is really focused on getting them to what they're looking for, and sometimes even recommending things that they might not have thought about in very effective ways. And there's a huge opportunity here. And beyond just the experience itself, the challenge is there's tremendous growth in data and there's tremendous diversity of the nature of data you'd have to bring in order to accomplish that, right? We tend to think about searches and clicking on boxes and so forth, but images, audio files, what's consumed that has been part of the universe of these consumers, that if you truly have a modern data platform, allows you to bring it all together to really create something that's different, that maybe, frankly, we never thought would be possible, just like what Danielle is describing.
What I find to be fascinating about what you're both describing is very often we think of customer experience as, the screen looks nice, everything, attractive buttons, but you're really going to customer experience at the most foundational level, and where you're deep into the operations, deep into the processes, and really reflecting at an intuitive basis how the customer is behaving and what they actually want from you.
In addition to this is data that they might not have access to before, right? So if you think about the context of the data that influences your decision as a buyer, of course, you got information about your preferences and you got information about the inventory and that's available. But what about weather conditions? What about things that are outside the store and outside of your own, data repository as an individual, if you will, that are going to make your experience better? What if we knew that, in 2 days from now, it's really going to rain and you should really consider that, or the conditions are going to change? So there's also a lot of opportunity in bringing external data to really create this experience that really up until now, if you think about the world of retail, 30 years ago, just was not possible.
Danielle, as you're thinking through data and customer experience at Albertsons, how is this all resonating with you, what Bruno was just describing? And again, this strong operational and infrastructure piece.
The amount of data and the amounts of types of data that are able to be brought together now, almost in the real world, you can replicate the same kind of data streams that you have online, right? Which is like, okay, so think about it in terms of like, if someone wants, right, and they opt in, you can know where they were shopping before they came to Albertsons, right? Versus like the, And online, you can do that, right? You've got the signals of like, we know what other sites you were at, and we can use that information. So it's almost like that's getting replicated in real life. And that can be a really powerful driver of customer experience, as long as it's used for good.
With this kind of broad spectrum of what's possible, how do you isolate, prioritize where to actually focus? You can do anything. So what do you choose to do, and how do you decide what to do?
We decide what to do a lot based on size of opportunity, right? So the first thing that we try to ask ourselves is this something that is, essential to the business at this point in time? And and how valuable is it? Right. So because we have always limited resources in every business, right, to decide what we should do. So I really encourage my data science team to focus on, okay, how much business value is there in this idea? Like, let's kind of get an idea and size that before we start going down into a possible rabbit hole that might be very interesting, but not very valuable. So that is really how we do it at Albertsons.
And what we've observed with organizations that work with is highly correlated with the level of pain that people are experiencing in their experience. I'll just give you a few examples. Searching a large catalog, for instance, is really hard for customers even if they know what they're looking for. So working with Cartier, for instance, it's a company that was started a long time ago, 174 years of history of Cartier watches. And so what they did is they now enable people to take a photo of a watch and find that across their catalog within 3 seconds with a high level of accuracy. So that's a huge pain point, because the customer already knows what they want, and you want to make it as fast as possible for them to find that product. So it's a great example of just augmenting the customer experience in ways that just really removes a lot of friction. Another example is an organization like L'Oreal, for instance. It's a French organization. So, Michael, I'm French, so I'd hear you go. I'm giving you two French examples, so I apologize for that. But L'Oreal has created this application, I think it's called Modiface, where you can experience makeup virtually, right? So it's augmented reality. And so I think if I look at what retailers and organizations, that are providing great services and products like that to their consumers, how they're enhancing the experience is very much related to what Danielle is talking about, is that they're coming to your online properties, or they're coming to your physical location to accomplish a job. That job might be finding something they already know, or experiencing something that, they're very curious, but would be really difficult to do. Changing makeup is hard. It's a very physical experience. If you can use digital experiences to suggest, here is based on, what you're wearing right now, what you should be putting on as makeup, is really quite amazing. Something that we just couldn't do before.
Would it be fair to say that this focus on data and customer experience ultimately comes down to using data to help model digitally the things that customers care about, that they want to do, and that they want to engage in? Is that a fair way to put it, or not really?
I would say it's pretty fair. I would add in that the way I look at it is this helpful? Is it useful, right, to the customer? Or is it just, because those are the features that they're going to use, right? The features, like a lot of times we'll focus on, oh, this is really cool, right? But is it actually going to be useful to the person in their life? The ones that use, you look at Uber, right? Why was Uber super successful? It was incredibly useful and filled a need that people didn't even know they had. Right. And those are the types of things I think that are most powerful when you're saying CX meets data.
There's this theory called jobs to be done, Michael. I'm a big Chris Christensen a fan, and is a professor at MIT, and has written this book on jobs to be done. I think people coming to your store, or visiting your online storefronts, if you will, they're not coming to just do that. They're coming to accomplish a job that sometimes is about finding a specific item, or sometimes even creating an experience for people they're hosting, right? So to the extent to which you can make that process a lot easier, is when you're really going to provide the best service. And that's what's going to make them come back, because they're going to get a sense that you get them, right? You understand who they are, you understand the job they're trying to accomplish, and the way they're hiring you, the retailer, to accomplish that job and enable them to make this progress towards the end goal. The end goal is not coming to visit your store. The end goal is coming to create an experience for people they love, or buying something for themselves so they can feel good. Things that are really around the human experience. And now it's a beautiful time to be in 2022, because we have tremendous technology. It allows you to get there a lot faster than we couldn't do that before. The clouds really helped us accomplish a lot of that. Data sharing platforms allowed us to do this at a very large scale for lots of different data types, while the data is governed in a scalable manner. And so we're really in a good time now to create amazing experiences for customers shopping and wanting to create experiences for themselves and others.
And we have a question that just came up from Twitter from Arsalan Khan. And Arsalan's a regular listener, asks great questions. And so thank you, Arsalan, who's asking about the ethical considerations. And so what about that? How do you think about the ethical lines, as Arsalan mentioned in his tweet?
The key thing for me is that it has to be in service of the customer. Right. So if the usage is in service of the customer, and you have to request consent, right? Then I think it's then I think you can say this is for good, right? This is data for good. If it is not in service of the customer, and it is in service of just your shareholders, then you really need to think about whether or not you want to do it. Right. So I think that is where I think about, fortunately, our use case is not one of those dopamine use cases at Albertsons, so we don't need to worry about that so much. But I think that is a huge consideration for the industry at large, which is that, are we deliberately making people addicted to their devices? And that is something that as a culture, I think we have to tackle. But fortunately at Albertsons, that's not our use case. We want people to be in and out of their app, and we want it to be easy and useful, and sticky, but not addictive.
Bruno, thoughts on this issue of the ethics and where you draw the line?
The security and of the data it's not a compromise, right? It's something you have to build and design up from that, right? So, an example is opt-in applications, right? So customers need to opt in into that experience, so you can be sure that the data is secured. It's only accessed by them. It's their data. Ultimately they own that data. The retailer really doesn't, right? So you first have to have that contract, that ethical contract, if you will, where it's very clear that you're never going to compromise on that. And then secondly, the way we see retailers work with data in general is the aggregation of the data. So you never really look at individual information. You really look at trends, and that's how you maximize really the relationship between the data you have and the experiences with your customers. And it's always to what Danielle was saying here, is that you have to align to what the job is and how you're creating the experience to the service of the people who are buying that from you. And you have to focus on where do we align here, right? So, and that's why I was connecting earlier in the buyer's journey, if you will. It really that's where you're going to be able to provide the best value for your organization and the customers, is when they're aligning. Anytime they're not aligning, I would say it's probably a red flag.
Let's shift gears a moment and talk about the organizational aspects. Building a data machine, so to speak, is complex. Danielle, can you tell us about the composition of your team?
A team of product managers and data scientists that own the data lakes, so the data platforms, data management, data governance teams, as well as data products leaders, and then the data scientists that drive all of those algorithms. So that is the composition of the chief data officer data office at Albertsons. And they're responsible for just, really driving this change. We were 11 months in at this point of a data office at Albertsons. And so we're still building and growing and changing. But really exciting opportunities to build some platforms at scale for Albertsons to drive, really, omni-channel, right? Like before, I would say that omni-channel has been a buzzword for like what? Over a decade, right? And everybody's been like, oh, this is like, I think we're actually at the point now with between data infrastructure that omni-channel is going to be a reality. And that's really exciting for us to be at the epicenter of building those products and capabilities and the data science that underlies it to drive true omni-channel experiences.
Bruno, the notion of a data culture, and where does that fit in?
First of all, I'd say that Danielle is an exceptional chief data officer, and what's amazing in our industry is that we have now graduated and matured to having a lot of folks like Danielle driving data strategies, and that's where data culture starts, right? It starts at the top. I think 10 years ago, we look at the latest data, only 12% of companies had hired a chief data officer. Now in 2022, according to the latest data, I think it's 74% of organizations. And so we're making a lot of progress in culture, as vague as it might sound, also needs to be supported by an organization that has a team, that has a charter, that is recognized and be brought to the executive table to drive the data strategy, right? So it has now been recognized just like your CFO, right? You have a finance organization. Well, now you have a data organization. And so I think that's where it's starting. We have a long way to go, because if you look at surveys in the market, and we ask organizations, what is the number one problem to being successful with data? 91%, almost 92% of people that have been surveyed will tell you that culture is their greatest challenge. And I think Danielle has a perspective on why that is. So I don't want to steal the thunder from her on that, but I think it starts at the top, and then there's of course some principles that you've got to go and apply.
So Danielle, tell us about data culture and your thoughts on this.
It's really interesting to have been, in the world of data since 2001, right? In the corporate environment, and see the change that has occurred. I think when I first started it, like the data culture challenge was more of a, how do we get people to use data to make decisions, right? Now the problem is more, what data do you use to make decisions? Right? Because there's so much of it, right? It's almost like analysis paralysis, right? Like you can get into, so many different metrics and looking at metrics. And I think this is where big data, right, and data science is going to have to come in. And this quote, fourth industrial revolution, right, come in, is in making sense of all of this data and making it actionable, right? Which is why I think data science is at the center of all of this. Is you cannot, you could look at data all day long, metrics all day long. Are you really making the right decisions, right? This is where models become very important. And then going back to our data for good conversation, like they have to be ethical models, right? Right. So it's an interesting moment in time for data, but I think that that's where the culture needs to, kind of shift, is to going from, I think we have a lot of very traditional leadership, right, at this moment in time, and they have a tendency to want to look at their reports. But I think that 10 years from down the road, what we're going to be doing is they won't have to look at those reports necessarily, except for at the highest P&L level. It will be automated. The decisions in the business will be far more automated through data science and algorithms. And I think that will free up so much capacity within our organization to focus on higher order strategy. And I think that will be fantastic. But I think we're at that moment of like, I think a lot of leaders don't really know what this new fourth industrial revolution means. And as data folks, we have to move them forward in that direction.
Or even trusting, right, that we'll get there. I think there's still a lot of education to occur, and the encouraging piece is the rise of the chief data officer and the rise of really good best practices around how many data people should you hire, what is the makeup of the data team, what is the role of data engineering and data science. A lot of best practices there that just go way beyond what we used to talk about 10 years ago on, hey, let's have your data culture principles, print them on the wall, and then hope people will respect them. That is, of course, you need to have that, but you also need to have an organization, and you need to have practices that allows you to remind people of that. So what we see organizations do is data literacy programs. So they do office hours and they train people on, what does it look like to understand and work with this data, this dashboard, this insight. And you'll be surprised that, people are really interested in learning that, not the tooling, not the dashboarding themselves, but they want and they recognize that they're sitting on a gold mine of information. And up until now, until you really bring the chief data officer in the organization, they really have not been able to use them beyond just the standard reporting, tactics that Danielle is talking about. I think all of us are consumers, and we're experiencing the tremendous benefits that occur when you have intelligence that surrounds you and helps you go throughout your day. But I think if we take an honest look at most organizations, they're not there, right? I think, in fact, there's research that shows that only a third of organizations are able to get value out of the data that they have. So, I'm encouraged by the progress we're making, but there's still a lot of work to do. And the number one barrier is the culture and the application, the deployment, if you will, the execution on that culture strategy, which, is still in progress right now.
We have a really interesting point from Robin on Twitter, who says this. He says, it's analysis paralysis, but it's also the data story and value that should be connecting with the data product. So company vision and value for the customer. Any thoughts on this? I think it's a really interesting point.
Your data program, your data strategy has to connect to value, and it has to be quantifiable. And so that's part of the role that I have, right, which is to develop this organization, plot the strategy, and then make sure that it's very clear that this is tied to business value, increase in sales, whatever the core metric what might be, and that the program is driven towards that. And if you can't, I am curious as to, Bruno's comment earlier about people, like how few organizations are getting value out of their data. That doesn't surprise me, and yet it concerns me, right? So it's because it's like, to me, data is so valuable that it's hard for me to even imagine a scenario in which you don't get value out of your data.
And everyone should learn from the work that you're doing. It's just still really complex, I think, for most organizations to, get a full visibility on their data, right? Because the data that they work with is often highly distributed, is, like we said, is in all types of shapes and format, and it's really challenging if you're evolving on a platform that might not be modern. So it's really challenging, first of all, to even just get basic visibility, and so then building data products on top of that is certainly really complex for organizations, to get there. Beyond the technical aspects, what we are seeing is the organizations that succeed really connect to this point that the listener is making on the value of storytelling. The business of making decisions is a very emotional one, right? So we're not logical machines that also have emotions. We're emotional machines that also use logic sometimes to make decisions. And so what we see is people using internal marketing vehicles to make sure that people are reminded of the culture. So do you have a brand around your initiative? Is your brand memorable? Are people recognizing this brand as they're going through their reports? A lot of organizations work with will brand their reports or their dashboard saying this is certified data based on the brand that we're using. And so there's definitely a logical component to it, but a big component is also how you're connecting at the human level, not just with your customers, but also with your employees who are trying to make the right decisions with their data. And sometimes they just can't connect with that.
I just want to invite everybody to subscribe to our newsletter so we can keep you up to date on our shows. Just hit the subscribe button at the top of our website. And if you're watching on CXOTalk.com, subscribe to our YouTube channel too. And tell a friend. Okay, we have a great question. This is from Suman Kumar Chandra on LinkedIn. And he says, how do you align the data strategy of your organization with the business strategy when the business is changing very rapidly? It's a really good question.
I like to simplify this, right? And how you do it is you say, like, okay, your business strategy is always tied to your P&L in one way or another, right? And so if you keep your objectives very clear and 3-year in nature, right, then you can tie your data strategy to your objectives quite clearly. Like I don't see a difference between the business strategy and the data strategy. They are one strategy. And so when you're looking at, and so to me, it's about my role, and my team's role is to serve the organization, right? So what is the business strategy? What do we need to build in order to be able to support that business strategy? And it's about making sure you're connected in and not in a silo as a data team, that you're connected in to what the business is doing and how they're doing it.
How do you connect data and business strategy when things are changing really fast?
The data strategy and business strategies are the same. What we see organizations do to make sure they are connected is shared OKR. So a shared goal between someone in the data team and someone in the business team that they can't achieve unless they partner. So that's how you just have to be able to advance together. I will say one more thing is that data strategy has the potential of actually advancing your business strategy. Here's another French retailer for you. Carrefour just launched an initiative called Carrefour Links. And it's the result of the maturity of their data abilities that now enables them to create a data platform where they can share their best practices on customer behaviors with the ecosystem, a business that they were not in before. But it's the result of connecting data strategy, business strategy. And now, because you've become such a mature data organization, you can advance the business itself. Again, not many organizations are there, but that's where the opportunity is.
Arsalan Khan comes back and he says, if culture is the biggest challenge for data, then where should the CDO report? The CFO, CIO, CEO, board, to whom should the chief data officer report?
It is depending on the business strategy at the time and what agenda you're trying to, move forward. The CDO should sit probably closer to whatever you're trying to move forward at that point in time, right? So lots of times a CDO will report to a CTO or a CIO, right? And I think that if you're at the stage in which you need to move your platforms from very old infrastructure to modern infrastructure, that's probably the good place for the CDO to sit for that period of time, right? At Albertsons, I report to the Chief Customer and Digital Officer, because that's the agenda we're moving forward at this moment in time, right? But I do think that where the CDO sits is different in every organization in a lot of ways, and so that's not inappropriate. Honestly, it is very appropriate, and I think that where the CDO should sit is dependent upon the business objectives of the company at that time.
We're seeing the same thing. I mean, certainly we asked through surveys, where do CDOs report to, and people had the choice: the chief product officer, the chief technology officer, the CIO, the CFO. And it was interesting because we got about the same percentage across these. And I think that's probably because of what Danielle's saying is really depends on who's leading the charge on, the most important business imperative inside your organization. If, at Albertsons, your goal is to provide the most compelling digital experiences or hybrid experiences for customers, and it makes a lot of sense that data is going to be the fuel that's going to create those experiences. You find organizations where they run under the CFO because they have a CFO that is very mindful on, we focus, just like what Danielle was saying earlier, on the initiatives that drive the best value for customers. And therefore, the way to assess that value is through the conversion into revenue and the ability to sell more and then sell different things that, customers come back to us with and so forth, and really optimize our processes. And then you have organizations where, interestingly enough, they work under the chief product officer because their business is to build data products. And so they have data product managers who will take the assets they have and then create experiences like recommendation and others that are creating those products that really are creating value for your organization and your customer. So there's not one answer. It really depends on the culture and the makeup of your organization and its business goals.
The role of the CDO kind of matures over time, because I think the first CDO was actually appointed in, I want to say 2006, right? So it's still a relatively new area and discipline. I think that if it's driving, really core business objectives, there are places in which the CDO reports to the CEO, right? And maybe that will become more common over time.
How does one measure data initiatives, and especially as it relates to customer experience? And Robin on Twitter comes back and he just wants to be very clear that data should not just sit in a dashboard. It needs to be informative, insightful, personalized, actionable, and ultimately lead to accountability. So metrics, how do we measure these types of initiatives, and especially with an emphasis on customer experience?
Data, if it's in a dashboard, isn't data. Okay, that's a metric, right, that you track. Metrics are not, they're informed by data, but they are not data. Data is what's underneath and behind. And so that's another kind of tweak to what he said I would provide.
I can sense Robin in the ether on Twitter smiling now, with you saying that.
And that's something that we need to that's part of the data culture concept as well, right? Going back to that is it's data is, a lot of people think metrics or reporting are data. No.
Okay, so Bruno, how do we measure? How do we decide what are we measuring here?
There are many ways to decide it, and I'll probably just take one and the opposite. The first one is, how do you measure value inside your organization, right? What is I think one of the issues in the success of the chief data officer today is the inability to connect the data with its value. And so I think that your listener here is hitting on a very specific one. There are many ways to look at the ROI, if you will, of data analytics. The first one is of course just the simple level of adoption, right? So are your employees engaged with the data? Are they actually making decisions based on data? Are they ignoring your initiatives? So that's clearly the first thing you want to look at, because if nobody's looking at what you've built, well, if you don't have data-driven changes inside your organization, it's probably a red flag. The other piece is customer satisfaction, right? Because ultimately, if you think about what you're trying to do here, you're trying to use data so you're more informed about what your customers want, so you can provide the best experiences from them. And so survey your customers, just like you see on the back of these trucks that say, how is my driving? You probably should have the same level of interest on how we're delivering on the promise. You came to our store, you came to our site. Do we really get you? Do we know you? And then probably the other area that I would look at is, how are your products evolving as a result of the information that you have? Is the inventory you have today the same inventory that you had last year? And if the answer is it's a 99% overlap, then you have to ask yourself, did you really not learn anything, or you were just right on when you started? I think there's so many factors that are going to affect your inventory, and hopefully with the knowledge you have from your customers, that your inventory has to evolve in places maybe you didn't expect. And so look at these three things. It's probably a good way to get started: adoption, customer satisfaction, and the nature of the inventory you propose, the type of company that you've become because of your knowledge of data.
What advice do you have for folks who want to use data to deepen their customer relationships? And I'll ask you to answer pretty quickly.
Connect with the community. There are many ways to learn from leaders, and I'm excited that they're watching you today. But start a conversation with people you admire in the industry. It really starts with the do's and don'ts. You want to learn from best practices. You want to learn from the worst practices. And people are really good at sharing that. We have our own video program we call Data Journeys every Tuesday, where I interview customers, and it's really designed to do that. So I would say the best practice is connect to the human beings that are behind these best practices, and reach out to them. Use LinkedIn, use platforms like that to ask your questions. It's going to be the best way that you learn.
Danielle, you started us off and you're going to get the final word here. What advice do you have for folks who want to use data to deepen the customer relationships?
Know thy data and know where it is, right? So you can get creative and inspired by data, but you have to know what it is and where it is. And start there. Start with the simple stuff, right? Like, okay, where does this data reside? How do we pull it? How do we know it? How do we understand it? And then you can come up with some really great ideas about how you can use it. And you can obviously come up with data, things of how you're going to use it, but maybe, that falls apart when you actually go get it because it's not there, right? So I always say, start with what's there. And then grow from there, right? Because if you try to abstract back from an idea to that, you may be disappointed. But if you start with the data, you can come up with some really interesting and creative things.
With that, we are out of time. I want to say a huge thank you to Danielle Crop. She is the Chief Data Officer of Albertsons, and to Bruno Aziza, who is the Head of Data and Analytics for Google Cloud. Thank you both so much for sharing your valuable time with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everybody, thank you for watching, especially the folks who asked such awesome questions today. Before you go, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button at the top of our website so we can keep you up to date on our shows. We have just amazing shows coming up. Everybody, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.